I've been working the night shift as a security guard for months now. The building is located in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by empty streets and the occasional passing car. Most nights it's peaceful, just the hum of the streetlights and the occasional creak of the building settling. I've gotten used to the silence, and most of the time, it's comforting. The hours seem to blend together in a kind of dull routine. But tonight felt different. It was just another late shift, or so I thought. Something about the night air was thicker, heavier, like the world outside was holding its breath. At first, everything seemed normal. I walked through the empty hallways, checked the security cameras, and made my rounds as usual. There were no signs of trouble, no unlocked doors, no alarms, nothing. Just the soft click of my flashlight against the concrete floors as I moved from one section of the building to the next. But then I glanced out the window and noticed something out of place. Just beyond the reach of the street lamp, a shadow flickered. It was quick, darting across the street, too fast for me to make out any details. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, just my tired eyes playing tricks on me. But then it happened again, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something wasn't right. I dismissed it, telling myself it was nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. As the hours passed, I tried to shake off the feeling of unease that lingered in the air. I continued my rounds, checking the usual spots, making sure everything was locked up tight. The building felt more and more empty with each step I took. There were no sounds, no signs of life, just the occasional hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Then, as I walked past the back door, I heard it. A faint knock, barely audible, but there nonetheless. It came from the door at the far end of the hallway. I froze for a moment, my heart skipping a beat. I told myself it was just the wind, but it didn't feel like the wind. It felt deliberate, like someone was standing just outside, waiting. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was nothing. I checked the door, making sure it was still locked, but when I turned back around, the faint echo of footsteps echoed down the hallway. My stomach twisted. I'd been here for months, and I'd never heard anything like that before. I moved quickly, checking every corner of the building, every room. But when I checked the security monitors, there was nothing. No one in the hallways, no movement on the cameras. It was as though whatever I'd heard never existed. I tried to ignore the growing suspicion in my gut, telling myself I was just tired, overthinking things. But the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave. The longer I stayed, the more I questioned what was real. I heard the footsteps again, louder this time. They seemed to be coming closer. I spun around, expecting to see someone standing there, but again there was nothing. Just the empty hallway stretching into the darkness. I checked the security system again, making sure all the doors were locked and that no alarms had been tripped. Everything was normal, but the silence felt wrong. The stillness felt suffocating. It wasn't until I walked down the long hallway towards the break room that I heard it again, the sound of something heavy dragging along the floor. It came from the stairwell at the end of the hall. My heart raced as I approached the door, my flashlight flickering in the dim light. I took a deep breath, but the door was locked. Still, the dragging sound continued. Something was in the stairwell. It was just too quiet, too still. I couldn't move. I slowly backed away from the door, my eyes never leaving it. The dragging sound stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that felt even worse. Then out of nowhere, I heard a door creak open from the other side of the building. It wasn't one I had checked earlier. I froze. I didn't know what to do. It was too late for a prank, and the building was too empty for any real reason to be there. I grabbed my radio, but the airwaves were silent. Whoever, or whatever, was inside the building wasn't playing by the usual rules. I couldn't even hear footsteps anymore, but I knew something was moving just out of my sight. My mind raced as I moved towards the security office to check the monitors again. But when I entered, the lights flickered. The screens blinked on and off, distorting for a moment before finally stabilizing. And that's when I saw it. In the corner of the camera feed, a shadow moved across the lobby. But it wasn't like any shadow I'd seen before. It was long, distorted, like something was crouching low to the ground. And then it vanished. My breath caught in my throat, my mind racing as I looked around the room, half expecting to see the figure standing behind me. But the office was empty. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I had seen on the camera wasn't just some glitch or trick of the light. It was real. There was something inside the building with me, something I couldn't explain. I checked the cameras again, desperately hoping to catch a glimpse of it again, but the screen was empty. No movement, just the empty lobby and the faint hum of the security system. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but part of me knew that if I stayed long enough, I'd find out. So I stayed. The rest of the shift passed in eerie silence. I couldn't get the image of the shadow out of my mind. I kept hearing strange noises, creaks, whispers, footsteps, but whenever I turned around, no one was there. The minutes seemed to drag on forever, and my eyes felt heavy with exhaustion. But as the clock ticked toward the end of my shift, I finally thought I was in the clear. I was wrong. When I made my last round through the building, I heard it again, the dragging sound from the stairwell. This time it wasn't quiet. It was loud, unmistakable. My heart pounded in my chest as I ran toward the stairwell, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. I stopped at the door, staring at the metal handle. It was cold to the touch, but the dragging sound continued. I pushed the door open, ready to confront whatever was inside, but when I stepped into the stairwell, it was empty. There was no one there. The dragging sound had stopped, and all that remained was the heavy silence. But I knew better now. Whatever had been in the building with me hadn't gone. It was still there, somewhere, waiting, watching, waiting for me to make the next move. The rest of my shift passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Even as I left the building, the darkness felt thicker, colder, like something was lingering just out of sight. I don't know what I saw that night, or who, or what, was stalking the halls. But I do know one thing. I'll never look at that building the same way again. And every time I walk past it now, I can't help but feel like something is still watching me. As I made my rounds, something caught my eye. I had been walking down the hall when I noticed something out of place. A door, one I was certain had been securely locked, was now wide open. The emergency exit. My heart skipped a beat as I stepped closer. The faint sound of a metal lock scraping against the concrete floor echoing in the silence. The padlock that had been firmly bolted shut for months was now snapped in half, lying uselessly on the ground. The door itself had been forced open. The metal frame bent just slightly, as if someone had been pushing against it from the outside. That was when it hit me, the sickening realization that someone, or something, was inside the building with me. It wasn't just a noise or a fleeting figure anymore. It was real. I wasn't alone. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, my breath growing shallow as I quickly retraced my steps. I had to make sure the other exits were secure. My mind raced, every scenario spinning wildly out of control. I had heard the footsteps, seen the shadow, and now this. The evidence was undeniable. I grabbed my radio, but it was silent. No one could hear me. I was alone in this. I sprinted back to the security room, my heart pounding so loudly in my ears that I could barely hear the creaking of the building around me. I slammed open the door to the security office, nearly tripping over the chair in my haste. My hands were shaking as I reached for the computer, flicking through the cameras to see if I could spot anything. The monitors flashed to life, displaying empty hallways and dim-lit corridors. But then, there it was, a shadow, moving slowly, deliberately down the hallway on the far side of the building. It wasn't the security footage glitching. It was someone. No, two people, moving in the building like they owned it. The men were creeping, staying out of sight just enough to stay unnoticed. But what really made my blood run cold wasn't just their presence. It was the way they knew exactly where I was. I couldn't see their faces, but their movements were so calculated, so precise. My stomach twisted in fear as I leaned closer to the screen. I'd never been more aware of the oppressive silence of the building. The only sound was the soft hum of the camera feeds, but it felt deafening. They were getting closer. I felt frozen, unsure of whether to confront them, hide or run. If I moved now, would they hear me? If I stayed, what would they do? As I watched, one of them stopped just outside the security office. The other crept closer, edging down the hallway towards me. They were just beyond the camera's view now, and I knew that if I didn't act quickly, I might not get another chance. I had to make a choice, confront the danger head-on or flee, and hope I could make it out of the building alive. The choice felt impossible, like there was no right answer, no safe way out. But then the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the room. That's when I heard it. The soft scrape of footsteps outside the door. They knew I was here. They were closing in. And for the first time, I realized the full extent of the danger I was in. Whatever this was, it wasn't a random break-in. These men weren't after the building, they were after me. I grabbed the nearest flashlight, my hands trembling as I fumbled to turn it on. The beam cut through the dark, but my pulse raced faster than the light could reveal the truth. I had to move, had to confront them, or at least figure out what the hell was happening. My breathing was shallow, my mind racing through every possible scenario. Could I outsmart them? Escape? Or would this be the last mistake I made? I crept down the hallway, trying to stay as silent as possible, my feet barely making a sound on the cold concrete. Every step felt like a thunderclap in the quiet, and I kept imagining I could hear them following me. My heart thudded in my chest, so loud I was sure they could hear it. I reached the corner and carefully peered around it, praying they wouldn't see me. But then, just as I turned, I froze. There he was, one of the men, standing just a few feet away. He was looking directly at me, his face hidden behind a mask. But the cold, deliberate stare made my blood run cold. Time seemed to stop as our eyes met, and for a moment I couldn't move. It felt like the world had gone silent, like I was trapped in a nightmare where I couldn't escape. I took a shaky breath and backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my ears. I couldn't let him see me. I had to get out of there. Without thinking, I turned and bolted, my footsteps echoing in the hall as I ran as fast as I could. The flashlight bounced wildly in my hand, barely illuminating the dark corners of the building. I heard the sound of footsteps behind me, quick and heavy, getting closer. They were coming for me, but I couldn't stop. I had to get out. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for breath as I fumbled for my phone. My hands were slick with sweat, and my mind was still racing. I called the police, barely able to speak through the panic. When they arrived, they took the footage from the cameras, but it didn't help. The men had disappeared. There was no sign of them, no trace of what had happened. I handed over the footage, but all they saw were shadows moving in and out of the camera's view, their faces obscured by masks. They said it was just a break-in attempt gone wrong, maybe even some thieves trying to avoid detection. But I knew it was something more. There was something off about the way they moved, the way they seemed to know exactly where I was at all times. Something about the whole situation didn't sit right. The police couldn't explain it, and neither could I. The building was empty now, just like it had been before, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was still watching. Even after everything was over, even as the sun began to rise and the city came back to life, I couldn't get rid of that feeling of being hunted, of being a part of something that I couldn't understand. The men, their masks, the way they vanished, it all felt wrong. I've tried to move on, but I can't forget that night. The night I realized there are things out there that can't be explained, that will always remain just out of reach. And I don't know if I'm safe from them, or if they'll be back for me again. I've been working here for over a year now, and nothing like this has ever happened again. The building is back to its usual silence, and my shifts have resumed as normal. But sometimes, when I walk past the back door, I can still hear faint footsteps in the dark. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but the sound always stops when I stop moving. It's like they're still there, just out of sight, waiting for me to make the next move. I try to shake it off, but deep down, I can't help but wonder, are they still out there? The police haven't found anything, no trace of the men, no evidence of what happened. The cameras didn't capture much, just fleeting shadows and the faintest movements. But that doesn't change the fact that I know what I saw. Those men were real. They were in that building, and they knew exactly where I was. Even now, when I walk through the halls late at night, I feel like someone is watching me, like I'm not truly alone. I don't know what happened that night, but I can't stop thinking about those men. Were they after something in the building, or was it something worse? I still don't know. The questions linger, unanswered, and I can't help but feel like I'm still waiting for the next chapter to unfold. Maybe it's paranoia, or maybe it's something more, but I don't think I'll ever forget that night, and part of me wonders if it's far from over.